In June 2016, the United Kingdom held a historic referendum in which the majority of voters opted to leave the European Union. Brexit, as the decision became known, shocked many political analysts, especially considering the UK's long-standing role as a key member of the EU. There wasn't a strong economic argument to be made for Brexit, and the costs of the decision are increasingly being felt by Britain, both financially and socially. So why did people vote for it? The vote for Brexit was not a spontaneous decision. It reflected deep-seated grievances and cultural, political, and economic concerns that had been building for years. To understand why so many people voted for Brexit, we need to examine several key factors: concerns about national sovereignty, economic frustration, immigration, political mistrust, and the campaign strategies that fueled the Leave vote. One of the most significant reasons people voted for Brexit was the belief that the European Union was eroding British sovereignty. Many voters felt that being a member of the EU meant giving up too much control to a supranational body that they didn't feel represented their interests. Over the years, various EU treaties had increasingly integrated the UK into a political and legal system that extended far beyond trade agreements. This was especially true for laws and regulations that affected everything from immigration policies to environmental standards. For many Leave voters, this was seen as an unacceptable loss of control, and they wanted the UK to regain the ability to make its own decisions without interference from Brussels. The slogan, "Take Back Control," became one of the most powerful messages during the Brexit campaign. It resonated deeply with people who felt that the UK's membership in the EU had diluted its national identity and political autonomy. This argument was particularly effective among older voters who had lived through the pre-EU era and who were more likely to romanticize the idea of a fully independent Britain. They believed that leaving the EU would allow the UK to reassert its sovereignty, control its own borders, and negotiate trade deals directly with other nations. Another critical factor that contributed to the Leave vote was economic frustration. For many voters, particularly in economically deprived areas, the promise of prosperity that came with EU membership had not been realized. While London and the southeast of England had benefited significantly from globalization and the EU's single market, many regions in the north, the Midlands, and parts of Wales had experienced industrial decline, stagnating wages, and rising unemployment. These areas had traditionally been the heart of Britain's manufacturing and mining sectors, but deindustrialization in the late 20th century had hit them hard, and EU membership was often blamed for making things worse. Pro-Leave campaigners tapped into this economic dissatisfaction by arguing that EU membership had not benefited the average British worker. They claimed that leaving the EU would allow the UK to invest in its own industries, set its own trade policies, and prioritize the needs of British workers over those of international corporations. The idea that the UK could negotiate its own trade deals outside of the EU and revive struggling sectors resonated with many voters who felt left behind by economic globalization. Immigration was another critical issue that played a major role in the Brexit vote. Under the EU's rules on the free movement of people, citizens of member states were allowed to live and work in any other EU country. This led to a significant increase in immigration to the UK, particularly from Eastern European countries like Poland, Romania, and Bulgaria. While immigration brought economic benefits, such as filling labor shortages and contributing to tax revenues, it also created concerns among some segments of the population. For many Leave voters, immigration was seen as a threat to jobs, wages, and public services. They believed that an influx of immigrants was driving down wages, especially in low-skilled sectors, and putting pressure on housing, healthcare, and education systems. Pro-Brexit campaigners capitalized on these fears by promising that leaving the EU would allow the UK to take back control of its borders and implement stricter immigration policies. The imagery of uncontrolled borders and overcrowded public services became a powerful motivator for many voters, particularly in working-class areas that had seen significant demographic changes in recent years. Political mistrust and dissatisfaction with the establishment also played a major role in the Brexit vote. Many voters saw the EU as a distant, unaccountable bureaucracy that was out of touch with the everyday concerns of ordinary people. The European Commission, which proposes and enforces EU legislation, is not directly elected, and this lack of democratic accountability was a source of frustration for many Leave voters. They believed that the EU was run by elites who were more interested in preserving their own power than in addressing the needs of the British people. In addition to frustration with the EU, there was also a significant amount of disillusionment with the UK's own political establishment. Many voters saw the referendum as an opportunity to deliver a rebuke to politicians from both the Conservative and Labour parties, who they felt had failed to address their concerns for years. Brexit became a way for voters to express their anger at a political system that they believed was rigged in favor of elites and out of touch with the working class. The Leave campaign itself was highly effective in mobilizing these grievances. Figures like Boris Johnson, Nigel Farage, and Michael Gove crafted a simple but powerful message that resonated with voters. Leaving the EU would restore British sovereignty, control immigration, and reinvigorate the economy. The campaign also used targeted advertising, especially on social media, to reach voters in key constituencies with personalized messages that played on their specific concerns. The Remain campaign, by contrast, focused primarily on the economic risks of leaving the EU, which failed to connect with voters who were already feeling economically marginalized. One of the most controversial aspects of the Leave campaign was the infamous claim that the UK sent £350 million a week to the EU, and that this money could instead be used to fund the National Health Service, NHS. This claim was plastered on the side of a bus and became a central talking point of the Leave campaign, despite being widely debunked. Nevertheless, it resonated with voters who were concerned about the state of the NHS and other public services. The idea that leaving the EU would free up vast amounts of money to invest in domestic priorities was an appealing argument for many, even if it was factually incorrect. So ultimately, the vote for Brexit was driven by a combination of factors: a desire to reclaim national sovereignty, economic frustration, concerns about immigration, political mistrust, and the effectiveness of the Leave campaign's messaging. For many voters, Brexit represented an opportunity to take control of their country's future and break free from what they saw as an undemocratic and economically harmful European Union. While the decision to leave the EU has had far-reaching consequences, understanding why so many people voted for Brexit requires an appreciation of the deep-seated grievances and concerns that shaped the referendum.